I was an artist who ran like a toy company or something, like I would never like take my art CC0, because just from what I've seen over the past couple years and what I've heard from just like, giving away copyrights and trademarks, I think that's just not the right route. Thanks for making this work.
No, my pleasure, mate. Thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate it. For those that listen to the podcast will know I ask all the hard-hitting questions. So you posted yesterday that you needed to get some Oreos, and I want to confirm if you got those.
I did not. Unfortunately, the closest store to me doesn't sell most name brand snacks, and so I didn't want to get in my car and drive to get some. So I've yet to get some.
What's the next best thing?
The next best thing, I don't know. I've been eating like a lot of white cheddar popcorn recently.
Oof, interesting.
But, yeah, I don't know. I like white cheddar snacks, but I don't know. Us Americans are really just, I don't know. We have poor taste buds, so.
My friends get, because I'm going to New York for the first time in August, and I haven't actually been to America since I was 16. So curious to see it.
What are you doing there?
Just fun. Yeah, my partner's best friend's getting engaged, so just in New York for the week.
Yeah, just in August, you said?
Yeah, sorry, late August, early September.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, it's such a nice place. The only problem is if you only have a few days, and there's like, you really need to figure out what you're gonna do, because yeah, there's a lot. But I would say a lot of people like have all these big destinations they want to go to. Right, like you want to go to the Met and you want to see the Brooklyn Bridge and see the statue or whatever. But then they skip out on all the like stuff in between. And so my personal recommendation, just because I've gone to New York like more times than I can count, is you should just walk if you have the opportunity. It's just like, yeah, it might take you like 20 more minutes to go somewhere, but you just see so many things along the way, and it's just a fun experience to walk.
I couldn't agree more. And I said the exact same to my partner the other day, because I love going to places and just seeing things that the everyday person maybe doesn't look at.
Yeah, exactly.
That lives in New York. So just walking. I've no interest in seeing the major destinations. I just want to walk around. I want to eat shit food at a bodega. I want to just live as if I was living there, even though it's a short time.
Yeah, you gotta get like halal food, 100%. Like the street, like the street food there is like you definitely have to get some. And yeah, just living like a New Yorker, walking with your pizza folded and stuff like that.
I'm so excited for it.
It's fun. It's fun. I enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I noticed that you said yesterday as well that you were big into gaming growing up. Do you continue to be?
Oh, I wish I had my Switch here. Right now I'm playing Tears of the Kingdom.
Nice.
The only thing is like I don't have that much time anymore in my life, as like anyone, just the same as everyone who gets older and older. But I still really enjoy video games. So I just finished like watching like catching up with some of the StarCraft 2 tournaments.
Nice.
And trying to catch myself up with all the stuff going on with like Counter-Strike, because they're coming out with Counter-Strike 2 now, and so I try to like follow esports at the very minimum.
Yeah, I've got a lot of friends that are big into the business side of esports, and I actually played CS, Counter-Strike 1.6 for years until Dad stopped me playing because he thought I was turning into a nerd. Mom and Dad were coming back home. You get back to the book, start studying. No more Counter-Strike.
It's an addicting game.
I could have been somewhat, Grant. I could have been that esports player you were watching, but it wasn't the beat.
Yeah, you could have. I could have been that too, actually.
Because you made a post about ADHD yesterday, and I was laughing because some of the traits that you have around hyper fixating on certain topics and then becoming exceptionally good at them, obviously with your breakdancing, your art, your medical work, they're very hard things to juggle.
Yeah, um I I've never been formally diagnosed with ADHD. But it's a long story. But I would, I've been to the doctors a lot when I was a little kid because of my hyperactivity and stuff. And it's like even to this day, like the hardest part about like studying or taking an exam is it's like extremely difficult for me to sit for longer than like quite literally like 2 to 3 minutes at a time or keep my mind focused on something. So I like really enjoy myself right now in the hospital because I'm on kind of the inpatient wards rotation. So I'm like taking care of like our team has like upwards of 18 patients. So between like, the four of us. So it's cool to just like have like so many little things go off, like notifications and problems and issues I have to kind of run around to, because honestly, like that's what keeps me like really motivated to and interested. Otherwise, like if I'm like trying to focus on one task for like a allotted period of time, it's like really difficult for me to like stay focused. So that's just like my life in a nutshell.
I'm the exact same. I only got formally diagnosed maybe 2, 3 years ago, and just I went through the whole corporate world, and I probably got a little bit zombified by doing things the way everyone did them. And then when I started to do more entrepreneurial ventures, I realized that I thrived in the chaos and learning and solving a different problem every day.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think like honestly, at the end of the day, like they say like one of the biggest steps towards like addressing like mental illness, and I'm not saying like ADHD is a mental illness, but just mental like psychiatric related things is like being aware and self-aware of, what you might have or what you do have. So just being self-aware of myself and knowing like what it is that makes me happy, but also just being aware that, maybe, I might be less focused for a longer period of time than, my colleagues is it's totally fine as long as I know how to go about utilizing some of those traits, personal traits, to my advantage.
Yeah, and it's the periods of unfocus get counteracted by periods of hyper focus, obviously. So it's just knowing when you're in the zone, quote unquote, that you've got to go for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
When you, which probably leads me to a good question. If you think of the last 5 years when you were creating something, is there a time where you felt you were in that zone, and what exactly were you creating at that time?
Um, Sorry, could you rephrase the first part of your question?
Yeah, of course. So over the past 5 years, was there a time you were creating a piece or something that you felt so excited about that you couldn't sleep? You were thinking about it constantly. What piece were you creating then?
I think that's me with every piece actually. It's really hard for me to not ruminate like persistently over an illustration if it's not completed. And so, I've lost a lot of sleep trying to complete a lot of illustrations, or at least like, kind of work at them kind of persistently because yeah, I mean, if I have something like really interesting idea, I'll try to jot it down. And that's what I actually used to do in college a lot. Just like I have like quite literally like a stack of post-its and I'm just like jotting stuff down and it really like helps me out a lot um just to straighten my thoughts out, but also like it's really difficult for me to like think about anything else if I'm really excited about creating like a new illustration or just some like creative endeavor. Um and so I would say just about every illustration that I complete or series that I do, um, I I just like do my best to like get those done in a timely fashion, which is probably why I have a lot of illustrations that I complete kind of on a yearly basis, and I wouldn't say like I'm rushing them. I'm just like I know how to do what I know how to do basically. And so um yeah, I think like all the illustrations I create, I'm pretty hyper fixated on them, um and then it's just kind of on to the next one.
It makes sense, and not every piece needs to be super complex in its construction, and that's some of the beauty of what you do is
Yeah.
the fact that it's simple.
No, I agree. I think yeah, I think one thing that I guess I haven't talked about too much, like ever, is that a lot of people have recently been commenting on my illustrations, my newer ones, that, you know, it looks like a photograph. It's so good because it looks hyper realistic. And I've actually done hyper realistic illustrating before, and like I can get it to the point where it does like quite literally look like a photograph, but that's never like my goal with it. And I know I talked about this before, but my goal was always like creating illustrations from like the pure minimalistic side all the way across the spectrum to like hyper realism. And I guess my most recent illustrations are kind of teetering closer to more photorealistic compositions, but that's not necessarily like what my goal is. I think just the style that I'm trying to, just like that type of illustrating that I'm doing right now is conducive to the message I want to relay through my art at this moment. Um, but as you've noticed, like maybe even like the Stations 3 drop I did with the Statue of Liberty with Bob Lucas, even that doesn't really look photorealistic. So it's not necessarily like I'm like maturing my style or doing this and that so I can create illustrations that look like hyper realistic or as close to photographs as possible. Like that's totally like not like the antithesis of what I'm trying to do. It just so happens that some of the messages I want to portray through my art require a little bit more detail right now than maybe some of my prior illustrations.
Yeah, it makes sense. And Ayla almost posted something interesting the other day about what percentage she thought an art piece was finished by the artist and what percentage was finished by the recipient of the art. And I feel like yours leaves a good portion for the recipient to actually generate what they think of the piece.
Yeah, I mean, I won't talk about this too long just because like I don't want to burn through time, but you know, I do talk about how like my art is supposed to be a conversation, basically a conversation starter where it's, you know, like let's just say I illustrate I don't know, like a let's just say I illustrate like a landscape with a bunch of trees and grass, and you know, I think of it as maybe someplace in my childhood, and you think of it as maybe where you met your, you know, met your partner or had your first kid or something. And so it's really, my art is really just used as a way to just like communicate with viewers. And so, yeah, I totally agree that like there is a requirement, at least I see in my own art, that the viewer, like on a viewer to viewer basis, has to basically finish the meaning of the illustration for themselves. And so yeah, I totally agree.
It's because one of your pieces, the one that spoke to me the most weirdly was the bathroom piece. So it's literally just for those that haven't seen it, you just get a small section of the bath with the faucet. But I felt weirdly like I'd been to that place, and I'm not exactly sure where it was, which is the weirdest part, but I'm sure it was somewhere in Scotland in someone's house. And the chances of you and I being in that same place are slim to nil. But I feel like I've been in the place that you've painted it.
Yeah, I mean, that illustration, so that illustration actually I'm trying to create, is part of like a series I'm trying to create. Um, but that one in particular, I created because I think my entire life I've kind of been geared to, I've basically kind of subconsciously been told like, you know, modern bathrooms are like, you know, what you want to have in your house, you know, like you want to have a nice shower, no tub, definitely no tub with like feet, you know, and stuff like that. And And then, the older I got and, kind of moving out and having to like go to college and, you're not like the richest when you're in college. So you kind of live in these houses that are like over 100 years old. And then, even moving on to early adulthood, like sure, I'm like, I've made like, money through my art, but, people in my life and even so myself still like go to these places that are extremely old with bathrooms that have never been renovated in the past century, and it just spoke to me. I think like it just had a different message for myself, and I think there's a bigger underlying message that I'm just like not ready to tell people about my that illustration or that series, partly because I'm still trying to figure it out myself. But yeah, I wanted to create that because it's such a commonplace, like kind of old, no one thinks about it for a split second, kind of bathtub and bathroom. It kind of looks a little claustrophobic. You go into someone's bathroom and you see that tub. I mean, you're never going to be talking about it, right? Um, and so just something commonplace, just like that, is something that we can all relate to. And it so seems that anywhere in the world you go, like there's bathrooms that still look like that.
It's, I can't place it in my head, and it's really frustrating. And I feel like I was in someone's house at a party when I was at university or something like that, and I cannot place where it was. But that's kind of part of the mystique to me, which I enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at that personally, I think of some of my times growing, in college, yeah, in university, like either I'm sober or I'm completely not sober. Um, or I'm going to a friend's house in Manhattan, and the apartment is like 10 square feet, right? And like the bathroom makes up 50% of the apartment, and it's like a horrible bathroom, right? Or you go to like a really nice person's house, right? And the house is just like a mansion or an old house, and maybe like the top floor there's like a nice bathroom, and there's a tub like that in that bathroom or something. So I mean, I think like there's just so many different messages that you can have with just something as simple as a bathtub, which is why I illustrated it.
I suppose underlying it all, it's something that we all do, rich or poor, whether it's an ice bath or whether it's a shit bath or whatever the case is. It's something that we all do, and there's something that can resonate with that in itself.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and like that's part of the reason I illustrated that. Also, part of me wants to believe that there will come a time, probably in the distant future, but it's definitely happening, where people won't really, like newer generations probably won't really even recognize what that is, or have ever used something like that. I mean, they'll understand what a tub is, but I mean, having a faucet where, having those metal faucets, kind of handles where it's like four grooves that you have to manually kind of like twist. I feel like even that is something that like I very rarely saw growing up, in my childhood. Um, and then, like making sure the temperature is right by kind of manually adjusting the hot and the cold. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's also like a timestamp. I don't know how long my art will last, and I don't know how long any of this will last. Hopefully, an extremely long time, but I'm sure if it does last, a really long period of time, there will come a time where, my illustrations are a timestamp of the time I illustrated them.
Yeah, and I can certainly see that. And you've obviously taken inspiration from some of your pieces from other artists as well, particularly with the simplicity of it all. Do you mind just talking a little bit for those that don't know you well, how you got into digital art in general?
Yeah. I have this written, and I've spoke about this before, so I'll just try to. So if people want to like really dig into it, they can totally like check my Twitter out and my website. Um, but just long story short, always been an artist my whole life. When I went to university in about a decade ago now at this point, I wanted to get into digital illustrations, but I didn't know how. And so one day I decided to pick up PowerPoint, the program for like slides, like presentations. And there's like shapes that you can use, you know, for like your presentations. And I basically what I did was I stacked all those shapes on top of one another to create silhouettes. And those silhouettes, you know, became increasingly detailed to the point where they like convinced you that this was something like an illustration, similar to kind of how early video games use polygons, very rudimentary polygons, to create just these images of, or at least try to convince you that this clump of, you know, triangles was a character, or a house or something, right? And so very similar to that is how I illustrated. And then I moved over to Adobe Illustrator after a couple years of just doing that, basically. Um, and when I went to Adobe Illustrator, I created an illustration kind of with the same technique. And that illustration actually won me a scholarship at my university, where I was chosen out of my entire university as like, I can't remember, but to be like exhibited in one of the departments on campus. And so it was just really cool to see, because at the time I was a biochemistry major and a religious studies minor, and I had like, you know, competed against, you know, like the design and the art majors, and I happened to, you know, still be the one chosen for the scholarship. So it was really eye-opening, and it convinced me that I probably should take my art more seriously. Kind of along the same time, I was going to my local art museum. So the University of Wisconsin in Madison has a museum called the Chase and Art Museum, which has a quite literally a world-class permanent collection. And so it's free for, I think it's free for everyone, actually. So, you know, you just go there on a weekend or during a weekday for that matter. It's right on campus, and it's a huge museum. And I think I just wanted to learn more about art. I mean, like I mentioned, I wasn't a art major by any means. I never took a single art class in college, which in hindsight I might regret, but not too sure. But anyways, um, I just wanted to learn more about the artists in that museum. I was so detached from that side of things, just because like I was a, you know, I was just like a digital artist just starting out in the world, had no idea like how digital art could even become what we call fine art. And really there was no big avenue until NFTs, really. But yeah, and so I just wanted to learn more about artists. So, you know, just kind of browsing through the museum like quite persistently, and learning about some of the artists really inspired me. And so when I went, and so, you know, like a lot of my art is kind of inspired by some of the art I see in that museum, particularly like Ed Ruscha's Standard Station that I've mentioned quite a bit in the past. But, you know, I've since I just enjoyed art back then as I do now, I would go to museums a lot whenever I had the chance. And so one year I went to the Whitney in Manhattan. It's in the financial district. Um, I believe it's in the financial district. It's downtown. Anyways, they had a rotating Grant Wood exhibition, and Grant Wood, for those who don't know, painted American Gothic, which is part of the permanent collection at the Institute for Art in Chicago. Um, and Grant Wood is from Iowa, which is a bordering state from Wisconsin. So you'll see a lot of his art in Iowa, which, you know, I used to go to Iowa a lot, and in Wisconsin, in Illinois, and in Minnesota. And you'll see a lot of his art alongside, you know, kind of the other artists, part of his movement called the Regionalists, which was a very American-based art movement in the early 1900s. And all of that kind of inspired me a ton. And so with this kind of new vector medium I was using on Adobe Illustrator, illustrating kind of in the way that I knew, which is the same way I illustrate today, I kind of mixed that with my inspirations in, you know, fine art to create kind of the style that I have today. And of course, you know, it took a lot of like trial and error. It took a lot of like real like criticism that I just had to swallow. And I'm really glad that people really criticized my art at the beginning and gave me honest, like blunt feedback, because I don't think I would be creating the same stuff today. Um, and and yeah, I mean that's kind of all of that in a nutshell.
It's such a difficult thing to listen to people critique anything you do. But I suppose the beauty is somewhere in between listening to that critique and being like you did and just saying, no, this is what I'm doing. Whether I've studied this, whether I'm as capable as these fine art majors, I'm just going to do it because I believe in what I'm doing. So the truth's always somewhere in between listening to that critique and just backing yourself to do it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I think that's just my personality, though. I think it depends from a person to person basis. I mean, like, for example, like this is just an example the only example I can think off the top of my head right now, but like, you know, if someone comes into the hospital and I'm taking care of them and, you know, I think I need a second opinion from someone else. I mean, I'm going to advocate for my patient, but if another doctor is really convinced about something, that, you know, you have to like swallow your pride at some point and realize like they have their own, you know, background in education and they have a legitimate concern or opinion that you should consider as well. Even like when we talk about kind of quote unquote branding and whatever, like social media stuff on Twitter, I mean, artists can do whatever they want, and that's completely fine. And I support that. I support artists doing whatever they want. What I want to do is learn from people's mistakes and learn from the criticism and, you know, kind of the feedback people give me. And it's just about being self-aware. So knowing your limits of when to kind of bend the knee and just knowing like, yeah, some people probably actually do have more knowledge than you about art or finance or NFTs or everything and anything kind of in between as well. There's people probably who, for the most part, unless like you're Tyler Hobbs or you know, like Snowfro, like there's people probably who are much more successful than you in the NFT space. And so if they have some, you know, constructive words, you should at least take the time to try to understand what they're saying. So that's just what my kind of approach has been, and I don't think I regret anything. I think I've been pretty successful with that approach. So
Yeah, I mean, anyone innovative across any realm of work has had to break the mold and not listen to prior advice sometimes.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's just knowing about that balance, and I think it's hard. And I think it's probably harder when you're young, just less,
Yeah,
less experiences.
I think an old mentor of mine said to me, "Don't take advice from people who haven't done the things that you want to do."
Yeah,
So
I agree.
yeah, so and I mean that's oversimplification, obviously, but I definitely think there's some truth in it. I think too many people go down the other path where they take criticism and they listen to everyone's opinion on what they should be doing. And sometimes they just need to go for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think I have anything else to say. Just that it's ultimately it comes down to being self-aware of who you are. And if you're not honest with yourself, then that's probably where, like, I know that's my personality to like try and understand people's perspectives. And so naturally, when I'm in NFTs or when I'm in art, I try to at least at the very minimum appreciate what people are trying to say and not like overreact. But I mean, if you at baseline, like as a person, overreact to everything and you have like an anger problem, then like I can't blame you for whatever things you do on Twitter or whatnot, you know.
Yeah, yeah, for
It's not,
sure.
it's not my problem. It's not my problem.
I'm sure I've not always been a nice guy 100% of the time. So,
Yeah.
just going on to that, you've got a couple of takes that you've had on your Twitter that I'd love to hear from you about it, particularly CC0. Now CC0 is something that I've been discussing on this podcast a couple of times, and I don't have a final opinion on it. So your comments actually changed my mind a little bit on it. So I'll just read it. So CC0 isn't the ethos of this space a lot of people seem to shill back a year ago. It's something that resonates with me individually, which is why a few of my pieces are CC0. Being pressured to sign off rights is almost the antithesis of what crypto stands for. And I kind of get this now that I've read it again. I think that CC0, although super powerful in spreading message, sometimes it's at the detriment of the artist's financial well-being. So I think, yeah, do you mind just giving me some of your thoughts? Because I'm trying to solidify my thoughts on it, and yours are helpful.
Yeah, I think CC0 is a cool concept, but you have to be like completely on board as an individual. A lot of people want to do CC0 from a business perspective, which I don't necessarily want to say I'm like strongly against, but I definitely disagree with a business model that's completely giving away rights where, I mean, there's a lot of people who have done extraordinarily more business related things than I have, but in my mind, giving away IP rights is like, the Achilles heel, right? You are like, that is at the end of the day, like what people are purchasing, whether they're buying you out or whether they're buying your product or whether they're evaluating your business. It's really like, what do you have to provide that you can legally say is yours and that no one else can take from you? And so from a business perspective, I like, if I were to run a company, like if my art was in some way, I don't know, like a DAO or not even related to, NFTs. Like if I was an artist who ran like a toy company or something, like I would never like take my art CC0, because if I have shareholders that rely on like a structured business model in any means besides just like creating art and then selling it, I just don't think that that's very conducive. I mean, I could be wrong, but just from what I've seen over the past couple years and what I've heard from just like, giving away copyrights and trademarks, I think that's just not the right route. From a personal perspective, I think it could work. But I think I've mentioned this before quite a few times, that there's a few artworks that I have, you know, like especially the more popular ones, like the alien, which broke my all-time high and still is my all-time high. And then of course my cow, which is my profile picture, and a couple more. Like those are all CC0. I have yet to CC0 a lot of my art. And for all intents and purposes, at least for now, I won't like copyright strike anyone who creates art using my art. But I haven't CC0'd it yet, and I don't know. I think that just whole thing is just pending. Like I don't think I'm gonna go ahead and CC0 all of that stuff, just because like, again, like it's all an experiment, and it's hard to just like, I don't want to just like flip the switch and say everything is CC0 just now. But yeah, I'm not going to go after anyone in particular. But yeah, I think like from a personal perspective, I've always thought like my art is supposed to be, shared, right? And so when I first created art, and I'm sure a lot of artists feel the same way, like I just wanted people to have some of my art. So when I charge people for prints or for shirts or whatever, like I would just like charge them what it like cost me to ship it and print it and manufacture it. So would always just break even, never make a profit. And I just felt like going CC0 with some of my art was the best way to continue that mindset without necessarily like minting everything an unlimited, supply count. Because obviously, like I still want to be recognized as an artist. I still want to make money. I still want my holders to make money. And so that going CC0 on some of my artworks, I think, is like the best route I could take at the moment. And so, yeah, I'm really happy of the pieces I CC0'd, and like Transient Labs used the alien for a drop an art battle last year, which was amazing. They like turned it into a digital clock that you can check on OpenSea. Tons of people like minted like their version of the cow, and like I'm completely happy with that. And other people minted things that like of my other art that I haven't technically CC0'd, but like it's like cool. Like I'm completely fine with it. But yeah, that's kind of my whole thing in a nutshell. And the other thing is like I don't necessarily agree with anyone like saying you have to CC0 your art. And yeah, I feel like people got pressured to CC0 this and that, and yeah, and
I think I think this hybrid model of what you're doing is interesting, because if we look at it like three parties, the collector, the artist, and then the wider populace that might see the art, CC0 is great for your brand building and for other people obviously remixing it and getting your name out there, but financially it's worse more often than not for you. It'll be better for the collector, because if the collector's got a one of one and it's CC0, then their piece becomes worth more money. But I think it's trying to find that financial balance between the artist, the collector, and getting the word out there. That's a really hard one to nail down.
yeah, I mean, mind you, like the space is like what, like I don't know, I'm throwing a number out, but like 5 to 10,000 active people, right? Especially like on the art side, there's only like several thousand people probably, right, who are like really active. And so like if we're talking about CC0 and we're arguing about CC0 and also just like talking about like getting your brand out there and stuff, I mean, you're talking within like a very closed circle of people. And like in terms of branding, if you go CC0, I mean, no one I think is like has even reached like commercial success to the point where we're having discussions about CC0 and giving away rights that like have extremely large ramifications from a financial or like social perspective. I think like even Xcopy going CC0, like Xcopy is a very niche artist in a very niche community. And so like I still think we haven't even seen like the full extent of what CC0 means, even for Xcopy, and not even close. I think like probably like a tiny fraction, a fraction of a fraction of what his brand could become. And so like these conversations are things that we have, but everything is quite literally hypothetical. I mean, sure, like a company like is successful or fails because of a CC0 call, or an artist, you know, succeeds or fails because of a CC0 call. But at the end of the day, like these are such small scale endeavors in, you know, relative to like the greater things in the world, that I just think like these conversations just need to continue. And what we say now probably is going to be extremely different from 10 years from now, if like NFTs actually become quote unquote mainstream.
Yeah, and I just love that your opinion goes against the grain, because I feel like some people over romanticize CC0. I think it's exceptionally important for certain things like spreading a message with the memes, etc. But I just don't want artists to feel like they need to do it in some sort of romantic way. And it's part of the podcast is that I really want artists to not feel guilty about making money. Artists through history have been overly romanticized for not making money, but the time is here to make money for artists. And there's no shame in that.
No, there's no shame. I think everyone should. Yeah, I feel like people shame NFT collectors. I mean, quote unquote collectors. I think we all have different opinions on what the word collector actually entails. But anyways, people who buy NFTs from artists, um, a lot of them will trade them, you know, in less than a year's time. And people tend to shame those people who are just trying to make quote unquote fast money. I see that most of the time, but I do also see artists like being shamed for trying to make money. And at the end of the day, like I think everyone kind of understands that they're trying to make money, and there's also an extremely dedicated group of community members who are like strictly technology driven. Um, but even then, like there's a lot of overlap. So I think monetary incentive is huge in this space. And so, and then of course it is for me as well. And so like even beyond like just like digits in my bank account, like just making sure that the art that I have is also valuable beyond like my own personal wealth, but just like my name and market cap and whatever. So I try
And
not to.
just those digits in your bank account, even like if one day you realized that you didn't want to do the medical work anymore and you wanted to fully focus on your art, it gives you that flexibility to do so. The money isn't about the money. The money's just having the flexibility to do what you want with your life.
Maybe for myself, I feel like there's some people out there, there's a lot of people out there who want to at least portray they live lavishly. So
Yeah.
yeah, so maybe for
Yeah.
myself, that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a whole underlying set of
Yeah.
things with that as well, I'm sure. So 6529, how did this all come about? How did you meet?
I think 6529 reached out to me in my DMs at one point. We had a little Discord going between 6529 and some of the team members, right? And, his team that runs the meme card. And I had an illustration. That illustration that I did actually was like completed, and I wanted to mint that at some point, but I just didn't know when. And then this came around, and I had this idea that I wanted to do a factory, like we're like crunching out memes. And I just remembered that I had this illustration completed, and so like I kind of like changed a little things, some things here and there, and then I added kind of the text, and then it was done. Like between the time like 6529 asked me to do something and then I proposed an idea, like the illustration was done like within like a day. So we were ready to go. Like and I typically just like to work kind of in that fashion where I try to go as fast as possible, or should I say like efficient as possible. And so it was a cool experience, but yeah, we tried to like this. The process was extremely streamlined.
And did you have was that overall theme given to you, or did you, in terms of seize the memes of production?
I think we got to pick between like some ideas because like the meme cards have like recurring concepts, and so I think I just picked the series of memes because um I wanted to create something that was like a propaganda poster, just because like I really like was into kind of that type of art when I was first illustrating, and so I just felt it would be cool, like full circle moment to be able to create something like that. So yeah, I picked a theme between from a list of things that I could pick, and yeah, it was just like a really like fun yet fast experience.
The propaganda pieces are fascinating because they've obviously captured public attention for thousands of years. What do you think it is that draws people to those sort of pieces?
Um, the sheer amount of times you see it.
Mm,
I mean, yeah, I that's all I think. I mean, like you like propaganda is like art in the like I go to I work at the moment I'm at the veterans actually what is a VA is Veterans Association. It's where US veterans who served in combat go to get their medical care. So it's called the VA. And at the VA there's just like a lot of these like old like propaganda, US propaganda posters, like buy war bonds and stuff like that. And I mean those were stamps, and those were like you learn about that in history books. And I think like especially like wartime era propaganda um is a numbers thing. Like you just see that so often and so much um that it just kind of gets ingrained in you.
and it's kind of representative of a highly emotionally charged time also. There's a whole subset of very strong emotions behind any propaganda piece.
Yeah, I would have to agree.
Yeah, they stir up tribalism. They stir up a whole lot of things that a lot of us probably don't realize we feel when we look at them at first until you actually analyze why you feel that way.
Yeah, and probably like you don't necessarily want to feel that way either. You
Yeah.
just you've just been told to feel that way. So
Yeah, and until you, once we're going back to the self-awareness piece, until you actually stop yourself and think about why you're starting to feel the way you feel, whether it's red and blue in America, whether it's any other conflict, it's quite jarring when you stop and realize how far you've come. I come from a very I come from Ireland where there was a lot of war between Protestants and Catholics, and the tribalism and the hatred and the vitriol was just so ingrained that it was hard to escape from.
Yeah, I think like any propaganda, yeah, I agree with things that really like are propaganda focused on things that like cause physical repercussions, you know, like war and things of that matter. Um, I'm hoping that the meme card propaganda doesn't have those types of ramifications.
Which is funny once again because propaganda in itself is seen as a negative connotation, but if the message is good, well then propaganda isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, and like the meme cards are like quite literally in the name, they're memes, right? So it's almost like a satirical, you know, like jab at like actual propaganda, right? Like government driven propaganda. And so no, it's just fun. I think like the meme cards are just fun because it's like lighthearted humor that I guess you could, if you wanted to have like a PhD talk about like serious like things associated with the meme cards, you could, but at at kind of baseline they're just like fun little things that are driven by community members in Web3.
Yeah, and I feel that DK does an amazing job at distilling very, very complex topics into a really fun, jovial first watch. You're like, oh yeah, that doesn't mean, and then you watch again and again, and you're like, no, that's actually very complex.
Yeah, I like how DK does his art. I think, yeah, I do appreciate like that he like has something to say about something in most of his illustrations.
Yeah, I love it. Right, well, we've solved most of the world's problems so far, but we've got one more to go. Um, I noticed the other day you were talking about how Web3 isn't going to solve all the problems artists face with current art spaces. You said that there's some things that technology can and cannot solve, and most things are a people problem and not a tech problem, which I completely agree with. Um, what did you mean by that?
Um, Long story short, what I meant by that was royalties going to zero was inevitable, right? I mean, people were excited about royalties for a while, that it was automated. And so you always got royalties, right? I mean, with anything automated, I feel like there's some inherent technology behind that, and there's ways to bypass things and ways to circumvent, automation. And so, I mean, just the same, there's now ways to automatically bypass royalties, right? And like I don't think this is necessarily like, I think people talked about royalties a lot as a way to drive NFT narrative, and it's cool. Like I love getting paid royalties, obviously, but I mean, people still get royalties like not on chain, like in the mail and stuff, and it can be legally binding, right? It should be a lot of the times, right? So whether it's legally binding or smart contract binding, royalties still exist in real life and in the real world, and you can bypass and get rid of royalties as well, just the same. And so I think a lot of the times when people talk about art specifically, and I'm saying this because I don't want to speak about the rest of crypto because I don't personally feel comfortable doing so, just because I'm not educated enough to have an opinion that's valid. But at least on the art side of things, like things that Web3, like narratives that Web3 like tries to drive into the public for why you should get into NFTs. Um, I think a lot of them are like straw man arguments, like the royalty thing, where like I think it was just inevitable. Like once people realized, like, oh wait, we don't actually have to pay these royalties. Like to me, I'm surprised that we've been paying royalties up until 2022, because I thought there was going to be a way to just get rid of that, early on. And there's a lot of other things, right? Like, there's still going to be malicious galleries and things, whether that's digitally driven or physical galleries, that are going to try to take 50% from you without actually giving you any form of representation. Like, just because you can create and curate collections on Twitter now instead of in a real life space doesn't make like predatorial behavior any different. And there's just like so many other things, related to that. Like, people are still gonna, do common practices of buying art and then pumping it and then selling it off when it's, when the price is right. And that's just something that is something people have done since probably the dawn of man, right? Like pumping and dumping things of, that you own at a higher value that you bought it for. So just like all these different things, like, I think there is a really good narrative overarching for crypto, and that is decentralized for the most part, at least, right? I mean, I'm mostly speaking about ETH and Bitcoin, but in terms of the art side of things, like, there's a lot of things that are really going for NFTs, like being able to tokenize digital art. I think is revolutionary, especially when it comes to like computer generated art, whether that's AI or especially like generative art. Having the ability to create limited supplies of a digital asset, I think, are extremely important. But besides that, there isn't too much, I think, that people like talk about in our echo chamber that I genuinely think is being solved by crypto, but more so just is a narrative that one day probably will get torn down, just like the royalties thing.
Yeah, and I feel like the music, I'm certainly no expert, but it feels like the music industry figured out the IP and royalties thing a lot better than the art world. Musicians have pretty airtight contracts, legally binding ones around their IP, around the royalties that are paid on playing of the music, etc. Feels like it permeated that a lot better than the art world.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But I also think that, like, I by no means am going to say that NFTs can solve this problem that we see between, or solve the discrepancies that we see between IP rights between art industry and music industry. I mean, NFTs are barely into the art world, right? And so for people to, say that NFTs are going to, be the revolutionary thing that takes over art, I mean, I think it's just silly. I mean, maybe one day, right? But for the time being, I think it's just one problem at a time that you have to, try to attempt to fix, right? And so, but yeah, no, I totally agree with you. But that also comes with the fact that media, from visual arts to auditory art, is consumed differently.
Yeah, I was going to say that it was probably an oversimplification from my part. It's a lot easier to track. It's a lot easier to monetize. I mean, it's more difficult to monetize eyes on art, for example. I mean, you can charge a percentage of entry to a gallery or whatever the case may be, but it's not quite as easy to monetize as someone listening to a song on Spotify or buying an album or whatever.
Yeah, just eyes are different than ears biologically.
That's the doctor coming out again, isn't it?
I mean, it's. I just had this random thought, completely unrelated, that I was just thinking that, like, you can typically multitask while listening to something, right? But you can't do that while looking at something, right? You can't like multitask while looking at art, but you can multitask while listening to music. Um, so like when we're studying, sorry, this is like complete tangent, but
No, go for it. I love these.
when we're studying, we typically look and read like books, or we Google things and we learn through our eyes. But there's also times we do the exact opposite, where you listen to an audiobook or a lecture and you can multitask with your eyes instead. Like you're in a gallery and you're looking, and you have like the museum doing a tour through your ears. So
It's
maybe they're not that
I
maybe they're not that different is what I'm saying.
I cannot listen to an audiobook while doing anything else. I
Audiobook is
can listen to music. I can listen to music, and I don't know if you've ever tried. Have you ever tried listening to binaural beats while you do any work?
no, I haven't. What is that?
I'll send some to you afterwards. So it's really basic kind of lo-fi beats, but it heavily increases your ability to concentrate. It just plays in the background. It's just like a normal music, but it's proven, particularly with those with ADHD, to significantly increase your concentration if you just have that on.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to send some to you after.
I what I listen to when I'm like working typically is I don't know if you know the producer Jay Dilla.
No.
He's basically he is like your producer's favorite producer. Basically, he is like long story short, he is like considered like one of the best music producers of all time. But he creates like these instrumental beats. He used to create. He's passed, but he used to create these instrumental beats. And they just people just loop them on YouTube for like an hour or 3 hours, and so it's just like the same like 30-second segment for hours, and that's typically what I just listen to in the back. But so what I'm trying to say is I definitely don't know what you're talking about. Although I have heard of things where it's like certain frequencies of
Yeah,
whatever. Like I have done that, so I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
probably the same. Yeah,
Okay,
probably similar.
I just can't remember what the frequency was, like four something or something like that.
Oh, I have no idea. I'm
I have
not
no
very
idea.
technical.
Um, so I have tried that, but it just like I think I just need to try it more.
Do you think you would ever make any music, or have you ever been artistically inclined that way?
Yeah, I used to try to make a little bit of music when I was in high school. Um, and I personally think that I could, like, if I was a DJ or a producer, I could probably make, like, if I give up art today and I really focus on like being a producer, I think I could probably do pretty well. Like, and I don't think I can do a lot of things in this world pretty well, but I am pretty confident in just like listening to things. But I mean, that is what it is. I don't
Do you
think
think you'll ever do anything with it?
I think what I would do first realistically is I would learn how to mix like some of my favorite vinyls,
Mm,
and like create mixtapes. Um,
that's old school, Grant.
it is old school, yeah, but that's kind of like that is old school. I was gonna say that's kind of like what a lot of like the hip hop music scene does a lot, or even the dance scene. Like people we create like a lot of DJs like create live sets. And it's really cool. And I think that's where I would start, and then I would kind of go from there.
Yeah, there was an amazing article in the Rolling Stone the other day about how Discord is changing the rap scene and the rap industry. I'll send it to you after.
Hmm.
So underground rappers and artists are using Discord to build communities, so that when they go to their gigs, they actually feel like they've got a sense of community there. One of them was joking and saying that he goes to a gig and he sees all these people looking at him and not looking at him like fans, but not looking at him like friends. And he went over to chat to them and they're like, "Oh, I'm username SMP Smith." And he's like, "Oh shit, that's you." And he's got all these people in the crowd that he's chatted to. And I
That's
suppose in some ways that same stuff happens in
yeah,
NFTs.
that's what I was gonna say. That's like the same. Yeah, I mean, like the past couple of years is like it's extremely anxiety driving when you agree to meet someone at an event or something, and you just know them by their CryptoPunk or their Bored Ape, and you like don't know, you don't even know what race or what like gender or sex they are, and so you'll quite literally have no idea like what to expect.
And you have to stop that shock on your face because you
I
don't
know.
know. Someone that hadn't met me come up to me the other day and said, "I thought you were a lot taller." It's like, that's all. That's all.
Yeah, and that's why like I'm glad that people know my face and people can like from certain photos can kind of deduce my height. I mean, for people who don't know, I'm 5'7", so I don't know what that is in centimeters.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm 5'10", 9.
yeah, so I mean, it's easier for me because like people just come to me since like they know what I look like, but I could see how it's extremely hard if it's like two anonymous people trying to like meet each other for the first time.
I think last question, because I'm very curious to know this. I think your brain works moderately similar to mine, and I'm very good in one-to-one conversations, one-to-two conversations, and I love having them that way. But going to big events stresses me out a little bit. I'm being in big crowds of people because there's too much sensory overload, too much to take in. And I'm actually not as people find it weird when they know me. I'm actually not very good in large groups of people. Do you do you ever find that when you have to go to big events, NFT events or anything like that?
Yeah, that's like I think that's like yeah, that's like my personality just in general. I like I have a difficult time going to like parties and large
Same.
social gatherings. I think it's just difficult to talk. I think it's really hard for me to make small talk that
Mm,
if I'm not like because if I'm genuinely not interested in talking to you, it's extremely hard for me to not have a pause in my conversation with you. Um, which I think I appreciate there's some people who I've met who either kind of understand that like silently or maybe they felt the same way and they're the ones who would just abruptly stop the conversation, just say nice to meet you. And, like I really appreciate people who do that and that's completely fine, like completely cordial. But yeah, I personally like just like being with people who I'm very familiar with, or if it's just like, you know, like just a couple people here and there and we meet for coffee or go somewhere kind of on the side of the bigger event, that's like where I personally would like to be.
yeah, I get it. I get it. Sometimes the small talk feels disingenuous. Like it feels like we've been constructed together by social etiquette, and I'm gonna have to ask you, are you enjoying the weather? You're gonna say yes, but neither of us are actually interested. But we just feel like we have to do that dance.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's just yeah, and the conversations are always never exciting either, right?
No,
It's like you go to like and it happens at like any time in life, right? Like you go to a NFT event, it's like, oh, did you just fly in, or you know, like where are you staying? Or like if I'm in the hospital and I meet a like a medical student, I'm like, oh, what specialty are you thinking? Like, are you enjoying, you know, your time here in the hospital? And it's like the identical conversation over and over. And sometimes it's moderately interesting, but sometimes it's almost like it's almost just like you feel programmed to say those things.
I I purposely in every conversation I ever start with anyone, instead of saying how are you, blah blah blah, I always say what's been happening, and I purposely do that because it shocks the other person into telling me what they've actually been doing with their life, and then I have a better baseline to have a good conversation with. So when I say what's been happening, you'll turn around and say, "Oh, I've just done a 28-hour shift on the ward," and then I can be like, "Oh shit, you must be exhausted. What happened there?" And then I have a more genuine, real conversation, and we bypass all the nonsense.
Yeah, that's a yeah, I guess I never have even thought about like trying to have different conversation starters. I just kind of feel like a cog in the wheel sometimes and just kind of par for the course and then, you know, get all these social anxiety things out of the way and then go on with what I actually came to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get it. Trust me, you're preaching to the converted. So, um,
Yeah.
awesome, mate. Well, I know you're pretty short on time, so I'll wrap things up. But thank you so much, for taking the time. I've got a book I really want to send to you, so I'll chat to you offline if you can give me somewhere to post it to. I'd love to
Yeah.
send you a book that I think you'll be interested in.
Yeah. Sounds good. No, thanks so much for making this work. I'm sorry that I sent you a message the last moment.
Nah, it's all good. It's all good. My partner may kill me, but if I don't make a podcast next week, I've been murdered.
Sounds good.
And it's all Grant's fault. All right, buddy. Thank you so much and have a good day.
Take care.
See ya.